My name is Branwen Emerald, and between the time of 2009 and 2011, I played a Rune Priestess in Second Life Torvell's Land. My mentor was an amazing and very frustrating man named Grim, who was the Rune Priest in Torvald's Land about the same time. In his real life, he's a well-known member of the heathen community and a published author of rune books. I have spent a great deal of time crafting a large selection of note cards, ritual, articles, writing articles, and trading apprentice. Grim was and remains an amazing mentor, but the bulk of the information currently available in SL Gore is my authorship. Since that time, I have continued my studies, focusing on the practice of Volvastav and getting active in the heathen community here in the American Midwest. I'm here to tell you that what you might have had, is a disorganized, inaccurate mess. I hope in this class I can bring us back on page to Gorean practices and authentic Norse practices, shying away from modern views. It's important to note to everyone who has a passing experience in heathenry, and even those who do not, that the terms and traditions of heathenry vary greatly within America, and even more so outside of America. While I have spent a lot of my time studying, heathenry is not called the religion with homework without good cause. I teach from my perspective as an American Midwesterner, and encourage everyone to be patient with this perhaps skewed view and suggest that they are welcome to write up alternative views on their own. We have a few required readings, and if you have taken my classes from before, you will happily note that this list is significantly shorter than others. Begins with Marauders of Gore, Germanic Spirituality, and the Havamal. I also strongly encourage you to read the Poetic Edda, Ibn Fadal's accounts on the Rus, the Prose Edda, Egil Saga, and Old Norse poems. If you would at this time, open up a note card and name the note card RPC for Rune Priest Class, and your name, and add the following information into the note card: your SL account name and display name, what sim you belong to, what your current role on the sim is, what role you are looking to attain, your knowledge of anything magical, religious, or the occult, what you want to learn more about, and when you're available for tutoring. I will use these note cards to address specific topics and areas of education. I will be available for tutoring to those who come to class each week. As part of this recording, because this recording is available at other times, I will be interspersing various keywords so that I know whether or not someone has listened to the class. First off, let us begin with what is by the book. If you want to play a Rune Priestess or Rune Priest, you must read Marauders. The level of expectation for this role and position nearly require the player to not only read Marauders, but to know it well. The Rune Priest is a leadership position in Second Life Torvald's Land, and you do no favors to the role, other priests, or to the community which you are dedicating your role play by being ignorant of the culture. Religious leaders are expected to know the people of whom they are leading. If you are not willing to read the book, please do not tell others you learned from me. If you do not read Marauders in totality, you have failed this class before it began. Second, the irony of the first paragraph is that you will learn nearly next to nothing about how to roleplay a Rune Priest from reading Marauders of Gore. So pray all you want for some nugget of useful information, but it's not worked for me yet. Consequently, what you are about to learn in this class is how to play a Rune Priest is my opinion, and is not presented as being by the book. There are topics in which I'll explain why I chose a particular way of role-playing because of the need to adapt to Second Life Torvald's Land and Second Life Gore, but they are still my opinion. Individual mileage may vary. When I give quotes, I am in the habit of using Wikipedia. While we all understand that Wikipedia is not the final source on anything, it has the advantage of quoting itself and being readable by almost anyone taking this class. Some of the books I may refer to are not in print, making it hard for someone else to verify the information without some effort in requesting a copy from the local library. FAQ. There is a frequently asked questions section coming up. At that time, I will be taking questions about rune priests. Please have your questions ready to go. And if you're listening to this audio section, please write down the keyword chicken and then submit your questions to me privately in a note card if they're not addressed further along in class. Rune quotes. There's a link here to rune stones and rune priest quotes that I have pulled out of Marauders of Gore as a quick summary just to get everybody on page. A runestone called the Torvald's Mark near the Skerry of Einar marked the southern border of Torvald's land. Rune priests replaced the initiates on the northern version of Kaisa. The calendar kept by rune priests begins on the spring equinox. Rune priests have long hair, wore white robes, a spiral ring of gold on their left arms, and a bag of omen chips at their waist. The Thing Temple was made of wood with a grove where animals were sacrificed. They have rare high council meetings attended by the high rune priests of each district. Thralls used to be sacrificed, but no longer are. The rune priest stood with the other high men and jarls at the assembly field of law. Rune priests were responsible for helping the people of Torvald's land keep their oath, which was sworn on the temple ring of Thor. Rune priests could read the runic markings as a language or as symbols. Rune priests repainted the rune stones. There are two types of rune stones discussed, religious and otherwise. Rune priests also act as referees in formal duels. Let us take a moment to discuss the gods and the religion of Torvald's land. Those of Torvald's land have a different creation myth than those of the south. In Gorean legends, the priest kings are said to have formed man from the mud of the earth and the blood of Tarns. In the legends of Torvald's land, man has a different origin. Gods meeting in council decided to form a slave for themselves, for they were all gods and had no slaves. They took a hoe, an instrument for working the soil, and put it among them. They then sprinkled water upon this implement and rubbed upon it sweat from their bodies. From this hoe was formed most men. On the other hand, that night, one of the gods, curious, or perhaps careless, or perhaps driven from the hall and angry, threw down upon the ground his own great axe, and upon this axe he poured paga and his own blood. And the axe laughed and leapt away, running off. The god and all the gods could not catch it, and it became, it is said, the father of the men of Torvald's land. And while we see Odin and Thor mentioned in Marauders of Gore, the implication that there was a council of gods who gathered implies more than two is certainly suggested in the creation myth. Men of Torvald's land worship the old gods. And I quote, "The men of Torvald's land on the whole I knew, while tending to respect the priest kings, did not accord them special reverence. They held to old gods and old ways." We are provided with little further explanation as to what kind of old ways were meant, though spattering examples appear in Marauders, but as to what it meant in totality to the culture of Torvald's land is unclear. To some, this means much of Norse culture is still a part of Torvald's land. To others, it is an unclear statement that should not be used to extrapolate assumptions, beyond the specific examples in Marauders of Gore. However, such worship of the old gods and the keeping of the old ways are not supported by the initiates of the priest kings. And I quote, "Sometimes those who insist on retaining the old ways, or were taught making the sign of the fist, the hammer, over their ale was subjected to death by torture. One that I had heard of had been boiled alive in a great sunken wood-lined tubs in which meat was boiled for retainers. The water is heated by placing rocks taken from a fire into the water. When the rock had been in the water, it is removed with a rake and reheated. Another had been roasted alive on a spit over a long fire. It is said that he did not utter a sound. Another was slain when an adder, forced into its mouth, tore its way free through the side of his face. The sign of the hammer is one such old way that is kept in Torvald's land. The only two Norse deities that are mentioned in Marauders are Odin and Thor. Standing on the broken fragments of the circle, Ivor Forkbeard cried out, his axe lifted, and his left hand too, "Praise be Odin!" And then throwing his axe to his left shoulder, holding it there by his left hand, then turned and faced the Sardar and lifted his fist, clenched. It was not only a sign of defiance to the priest kings, but the fist, the sign of the hammer, it was the sign of Thor. As to if any other Norse deities are known or worshipped in Torvald's land, we cannot say. Such a choice is up to each sim and each player. There are mentions of sagas, to which this link here, if you're following along with us on the website, will take you to the quotes of sagas and legends. Sagas are stories about ancient Scandinavian and Germanic history, about early Viking voyages, the battles that took place during the voyages, about migration to Iceland, and feuds between Icelandic families. And I quote, "There are various forms of ball games enjoyed by the men of Torvald's land. Some use bats or paddles. In the winter, one such game quite popular is played, men running and slipping about on ice. Whether there is any remote connection between this game and ice hockey, I do not know. It is, however, ancient in Torvald's land. Torvald, himself in the sagas, is said to have been skilled at it. It is anyone's guess as to if the sagas mentioned in Marauders are sagas from Earth brought with Torvald to Gore, or if the term is being used generically to refer to stories of Torvald's land history. It is by this quote alone that some players choose to include the Poetic Edda in roleplay, being one of the oldest and most well-known of the sagas. The religion of Torvald's land is overseen by rune priests, though it should be noted it was never referred to as a religion in the books. We saw thralls, too, in the crowd, and rune priests with long hair, in white robes, a spiral ring of gold on their left arms, and about their waist a bag of omen chips, pieces of wood soaked in the blood of the sacrificial bosk, slain to open the thing. These chips were thrown like dice, sometimes several times, and they were read by the priests. The thing temple in which the ring of the temple is kept is made of wood. Nearby in a grove, hung from poles, was a body of 6 ver. There is much more about runes and rune priests on our rune quotes page. It should be noted that this form of sacrifice was the same method preferred in Norse culture, and may be considered another one of the old ways. It seems interesting that 2 types of runestones appear to be mentioned in Marauders. Runestones painted at the vernal equinox that marks the new year in Torvald's land, and religious runestones that were painted in the fall during the fest season of Odin. And I quote, "Many of the columns carved with painted surfaces on the walls remind me of runestones. These stones, incidentally, are normally quite colorful, and can often be seen at great distances. Each year their paint is freshened, commonly on the vigil of the vernal equinox, which in the north is commonly in the south marks the new year. Religious runestones were repainted by rune priests on the vigil of the 5th season of Odin, which in Gore takes place in the fall. If the stones were not tended either by farmers on those lands that they lie, or by villagers in those locales that they lie, or by rune priests, in a few years the paint would be gone, leaving only the plain stone. There is no mention of religious runestones in Norse history and culture. This is a fascinating distinction for Torvald's land, which is a point of vast curiosity. Just some author's note on this section. I find it interesting that a more romanticized name for Norse religion is the medieval Icelandic term Fornsiðr, or old custom. What does this say to us, if anything, about Norman's use of the term old ways? Interestingly, in the setting of Wergild, the term custom is also used in conjunction with law. Here's some other links for you. The Thing in Law, Rune Stones and Rune Priests again, Worship in Norse Society, and some Skald quotes. It's obvious to me, at least, that from the quotes that there are more than two gods. It's perfectly acceptable that a sim or a rune priest chooses to use only Thor and Odin. It may make it a bit harder to do some of the grand festivals, specifically the Harvest Festival, though one might use Odin's kenning as Lord of the Earth as a role for the harvest. Festivals are discussed later in the series. Here are two links that you're going to want to look at. I will continue to update them as I go along. There is a link for Odin, which includes his kenning names, and a link for Thor, which will also include his kenning names. So let's get to the most frequently asked questions. For most of you who are here to learn about rune priests, but aren't actually interested in playing one, these are probably the things you're most likely to ask. Again, if you're here with class listening with me, you should have your questions ready. And if you're listening on our YouTube, you should get your questions put together in a note card and send them to me. Did rune priests companion? We don't know. Initiates didn't. Did rune priests carry weapons? We don't know. However, it was stated that no man was expected to go to the Thing Fair unarmed, and rune priests were at the Thing Fair. Did rune priests always wear white? Again, we don't know. The only time we saw rune priests in action is when they were in an official capacity at the Thing Fair. Did Torvaldslander believe in an afterlife? We don't know. However, the following quote suggests perhaps not. Most Greens seem skeptical of an afterlife, or at least seem content to wait and see. The only Green case, which as far as I know officially believes in an afterlife, is that of the initiates. And they believe in it, it seems, only for themselves, and seem to believe it is connected with such things as the performance of secret rites, the acquisition of secret knowledge, mostly mathematical, the avoidance of certain foods. Initiates commonly wear white and have their heads shaved. They also supposedly, and perhaps actually on the whole, abstain from alcohol and women. They count as one of the 5 high castes, the others being the physician, scribes, builders, and warriors. In some cities they are quite powerful. In others it seems they are largely peripheral to the life of the community. I have never been in one of these temples. Slaves, like other animals, are not allowed within. Dancer of Gore, page 279. Did women pray? We don't know. The women of the Two Trucks did not pray, but there was a woman in the temple of Kassel. And yet it is said that no woman might dare pray to the gods of Torvald's land in reference to the passage of the frenzy of Odin. And I quote, "The Two Chucks, incidentally like others of the wagon people, prays only when mounted. Only when in the saddle, with weapons at hand, he prays to the sky, not as a slave to a master, nor as a servant to a god, but as a warrior to an Ubar. The women of the wagon people, it might be mentioned, are not permitted to pray." Nomads of Gore. And then it seemed like the touching of these men by the hands of God, but no gods I knew, none to whom a woman or child might dare pray, but the gods of men and the men of Torvald's land, the dread, harsh divinities of the cruel north, the gods of Torvald's land. And the touch of these gods, like their will, was terrible. Marauders of Gore. I looked into the hungry eyes of a child, Clinging in a sack to its mother's back, she kept nodding her head in prayer. Marauders of Gore. And this was from a woman of Cassau praying at an initiate's temple. Did Koreans believe in magic and fortune-telling? Absolutely. We see women of the Chuchuks visiting the Harspexes, rune priests with omen chips, and an almost universal statement about a belief in magic. There's a lot more on our page about worship, prophecy, and the occult cult, and you can check those links and quotes there. Here's an example that describes some of the various ways in which they were interested in magic and magical items. The women of the Magans people, it might be mentioned, are not permitted to pray. Many of them, however, do patronize the Harspexes, who, besides foretelling the future with a greater or lesser degree of accuracy, for generally reasonable fees, provide an incredible assemblage of amulets, talismans, trinkets, filters, potions, spell papers, wonder-working sleen teeth, marvelous powered kalika horns, and colored magic strings that, depending on the purpose, may be knotted in various forms and worn around the neck. Nomads of Gore. Were women allowed to make sacrifice? We know that the daughter of the Ubar of Ar was allowed to make grain sacrifice, and I quote, "Lastly, at the culmination of Ar's planting feast, one of the greatest importance to the plan of the Council of Koroba, a member of the Ubar family goes to the roof at night under the 3 full moons in which the feast is correlated and casts grain upon the stone and drops a red, wine-like drink made from the fruit of the Kalana tree. The members of the Ubar's family then prays to the priest king for an abundant harvest and returns to the interior of the cylinder, at which point the guards of the homestone resume their vigil. This year, the honor of the grain sacrifice was to be accorded to the daughter of the Ubar. I knew nothing about her, except that her name was Talina, that she was rumored to be one of the beauties of Ar, and that I was supposed to kill her." Tarnsman of Gore. Everybody likes to talk about how by the book you are. So here we go. Do you allow for the belief in an afterlife other than the cities of dust? Do you allow for worship of any gods other than Odin and Thor? Do you perform human sacrifice? Do you perform free companioning? Do you use the hammer right? Do you allow women to pray? Do you perform Yule or Samhain, Beltane, Mother's Night, or any other holidays? Does your rune priest dress in something other than white? Have you used any form of divination other than omen chips? If you answered yes to any of these, you may not be by the book. If you said no to all of them, I hope you're playing an alt, because there isn't really anything else to do. With that said, let's move on. Standards in Second Life by the book Torvald's Land. Like any online role-playing community that implements fictional works, we may expand upon and interpret the small bits of canon that is provided for a single storyline into what is needed for larger storylines told in this community. For example, many find it difficult to role-play what was a vast pantheon with only 2 named gods. Thus, other gods may be brought into the roleplay. As stories and old tales are mentioned, it's theorized that those tales might be, and what, if any, roles exist for women in a roleplay community that has so many female avatars. It's not my intention to suggest that we break away from the books, even if that book is only Marauders of Gore, but to inform this class as to what they may expect in the wider roleplay community of By the Book Gore, and perhaps to encourage others to consider the authenticity of their creative interpretations. I'm going to take a moment to talk about source material. This has pretty much been how I have come at this class. First, some supposition and some logic. If we believe that Torvald's Torvell was brought to earth by the priest kings, a debate that should surely be waged by many, we can make the following suppositions in combination with the date of Marauders was published in 1975. Supposition: Torvell was brought to Gore about 1,000 years ago, making it the late 900s. If you want to read some more quotes on Torvell, those are on the website, www.portofironhall.com. If you are listening to this class on our recording, please write down the word Raven and send it to me. This means that our primary sources would be the prose and poetic Edda, which, though discovered and published later than the 900s, is believed to include poems and sagas dating to the 900s and earlier. Other sources that were sagas of events prior to 1000 might also have been known to Torvell. I've included a Viking timeline here for anybody who is interested. Fact: Norman wrote Marauders in a period of time before its published date in 1975. This means that he did not have access to the internet, and most books currently published on Asatru were not yet available. It is most likely to assume that Norman source material was the Icelandic and Scandinavian sagas, most notably Egil's saga, and Norman was obviously familiar with Beowulf. He was obviously familiar with Ibn Fadal's comment on the Rus people, and I've included that section also on the website. Why does this matter? There's a rather large debate as to the use of Viking information in SL Torvald's land. However, if one was to fully embrace the full scope of available knowledge about the Viking Age, we would not be on page with Marauders of Gore as it was written in 1975. As it is to his most likely source material, we should turn our eyes. It matters little if the information has later been proven or disproven. We're not recreating historical fiction, but rather a myth and saga-influenced science fiction. There are enough examples to those familiar with both Gore and these older works to be reasonably sure that they are the same sources Norman crafted Marauders of Gore from. Other gods. We had a discussion about a week ago with the other rune priests and some sim owners, and we broached the topic. If we acknowledge that there are other gods, as per the above quotes, what might they be? It was additionally asked if any female goddesses were worshipped, which ones are most likely given the Goreanizing of sagas. The male gods that were recommended was Frey, as he was second only to Thor in the Viking Age, and associated with crops and the fertility of the growing season. Njordr, who was the Vanic god of the sea, the father of Frey and Freya. Tyr, as he was associated with the Thing and the keeping of oaths. The Thing is certainly present in Marauders. Heimdall, accounted as being the god who taught the social structure of jarls, carls, and thralls to the people. In heathenry, we consider ourselves Heimdall's children. Jarls and thralls are both in Marauders. And Loki. There was an excellent point made that the god, who we see in the creation myth, has clear traits of being a trickster god, which leads the assumption to it might have been Loki. The goddesses that were recommended. Frigg, Odin's wife, the patron of family and home. Eir, one of Frigg's handmaidens, the patron goddess of physicians. Var, one of Frigg's handmaidens, a patron goddess of oaths, specifically marriage oaths. We generally agree, though, that Freya was very popular at various times in Earth history, but we kind of think she would have ended up in a collar in Torvald's land lore if it was retold. I know everybody's laughing, but can you see it, right? Totally. Freya in a collar. So here's some of my personal thoughts. Nietzsche writes, one was permitted to behold a plurality of norms. One god was not considered a denial of another god, nor blasphemy against him. It was here that the luxury of individuals was first permitted. It was here that one first honored the rights of individuals. The freedom that one conceded to a god in his relation to other gods, one eventually also granted to oneself in relations to laws, customs, and neighbors. To me, the Norse gods are clearly a perfect religion for Koreans. Not only are they bold warriors who claim their own destiny and are responsible for their actions, the very cosmology of the Norse mythos fits into the Koreans' love of the sky and the sea that is so well portrayed in Marauders of Gore. The Norse gods have an active involvement in the lives of the Norse people, as well as the very body of the god Gemir being used to form the earth. When a Torvaldslander gazes at the earth or sea, the trees and sky, they gaze on the creation of the gods, seeing the very body of a god in the earth around them, Odin, father of the land. We also had a saga discussion, and this was, I think, sometime back in December, maybe late November. And from the discussion on saga and legends at Odin's Hub, November 17th, right here, it was generally agreed that the sagas and legends referred to in Marauders of Gore would indeed include ones from Earth. There's a specific quote in this link here that you can look at. However, it's likely that much of the earliest tales would have been forgotten or adapted over time. Conversely, given that the North is a culture of oral tradition with long winter nights and an importance on skalds, many sagas would remain actively told, even if they changed in popularity or content over time. It was additionally agreed that it would be best if Earth tales could be Koreanized by Torvaldsland skalds, but as that's a rather daunting expectation, it's acceptable to use the Earth tales as long as there an understanding that they are old tales from a different time, as it were. Example of literature discussed: the poetic and prose Eddas, the Icelandic sagas, Beowulf, and the Nibelungen. In closing, we continue next week with SL by the Book Standards and the role of women and slaves in Torvaldsland religion. Please begin reading the required reading discussed at the beginning of the class. For anyone who is seeking to matriculate from this class and take the final steps of initiation, those books will be required before continuing. None of the required items are onerous, and at least Marauders is available on audiobook. Course completion requirements. You will be required to create a ritual script other than a free companioning, to do a rune reading, to submit one article that addresses a contrasting or expanding view on that which is presented in this course, about 500 words. It's about a page and some. Group role play where each avatar will be hung from a tree by their wrists. What they do in their role play in that state will be graded. And your final word is falcon.